The envelope was taped to my door like a warning sign, crooked, stubborn, impossible to ignore. Not slipped under the frame like a neighborly note. Not tucked politely into the mailbox. No, this was deliberate. Someone had stood here, pressed it flat against the wood, and smoothed the tape down like they were sealing a message they wanted seen immediately. I stared at it for a moment before touching it, my breath still visible in the cold morning air. The sky was pale, that washed-out winter gray that never quite turns into day. Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped closer, the sound loud in the otherwise quiet street. I already knew what it was. You don't live in a neighborhood like this without recognizing the tone before you even read the words. Still, I peeled it off slowly. The tape resisted at first, clinging to the painted surface like it had something to prove, then gave way with a sharp rip that echoed more than it should have. I turned the envelope over in my hands. No stamp, no return address, just my name printed in bold, blocky letters. Impersonal, official, cold. I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the paper inside. It was a single sheet, crisp and stiff, like it had been printed moments ago just for this. Violation notice. Unauthorized snow track damage to community roadway. For a second, I thought I'd read it wrong. I blinked and read it again, slower this time. Unauthorized snow track damage. The words didn't sit right together. They felt forced, like someone had stitched them into a sentence just because they could. A quiet laugh slipped out of me before I could stop it. Not amused, just disbelieving. I stepped back from the door and looked out toward the road, instinct pulling my gaze to the stretch of asphalt that ran past my driveway. Except it barely looked like asphalt anymore. A thin layer of fresh snow had already settled overnight, softening the edges, but beneath it you could still see the clean lines from where I'd plowed just hours earlier. 2 neat tracks, straight, even, functional, apparently offensive. I glanced down at the paper again, scanning the rest. Residents are prohibited from performing unapproved modifications or maintenance activities on shared community property. My jaw tightened. Maintenance activities. That's what they were calling it now. I looked up and down the street again, slower this time, taking it in properly. Every driveway had a cleared path leading to the road. Every sidewalk had at least a narrow strip carved through the snow. The road itself, while not perfect, was passable, safe enough for cars, clear enough for emergency vehicles. None of that had been there yesterday morning. And none of it had come from the HOA. It never did. I shifted the paper in my hand and kept reading. Evidence of repeated track markings has been documented. Repeated. Of course it was repeated. Snow fell. I cleared it. Snow fell again. I cleared it again. That's how winter worked. That's how this place stayed livable. My eyes dropped to the next line, and there it was, the part that mattered. Fine. $250. Repeat violations will incur escalating penalties. There it was. Not a warning. Not a conversation. A bill. I let out a slow breath, watching it fog in front of me before disappearing into the cold. The paper crinkled slightly as my grip tightened. $250. For clearing snow. For making sure people could leave their houses. For making sure deliveries didn't get stuck halfway down the street. For making sure no one slipped on an untouched sheet of ice. I shook my head, a small, almost involuntary movement, like my body was trying to reject the whole thing outright. Then I noticed the final line at the bottom. Only approved contractors may perform roadway maintenance. I read that one twice. Approved contractors. Right, because those had been so reliable the past 3 winters. I glanced down the road again, my eyes narrowing slightly as memory filled in what the paper conveniently ignored. The first winter I moved in, I'd waited like everyone else. Waited for the HOA to send their approved contractor. They'd shown up 2 days late. By then, the snow had packed down into ice. Cars were sliding. People were stuck. One neighbor had nearly gone into a ditch trying to get out for work. The second winter, they'd come once. Cleared the main entrance halfway, then left before even touching the inner streets. That was the year I started doing it myself. Not because I wanted to. Because someone had to. My gaze drifted toward my truck, parked just off to the side of the driveway. The plow was still attached, a light dusting of snow clinging to the metal blade. It looked solid, reliable, honest, unlike the paper in my hand. I stepped off the porch and walked toward it, the snow crunching under each step. The cold bit harder out here, sharper, but it helped clear my head. I reached the truck and ran a hand along the edge of the plow, brushing off some of the snow. Beneath it, the metal gleamed faintly in the weak morning light. This thing had done more for the neighborhood than any approved contractor ever had. And now it was the problem. I huffed out a quiet breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh, and turned back toward the house. That's when I noticed movement. Across the street, Mrs. Collins. Her curtain shifted just enough for me to see the outline of her face peeking through. She'd been watching. Of course she had. She always did. Every morning I plowed, she'd wave. Sometimes she'd even step outside later and thank me, bundled up in that oversized coat of hers, smiling like I'd done something extraordinary. Now, as our eyes almost met through the glass, the curtain snapped shut. Just like that, I stood there for a second, staring at the now still window. No wave today, no smile, just silence. My grip on the paper loosened slightly, the anger shifting into something quieter. Not gone, just settling. Of course, it wasn't about whether I helped. It was about whether I was allowed to. And apparently, I wasn't. I looked down at the letter one more time, reading it again, slower now. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to make sure I hadn't missed anything. I hadn't. Every word was exactly as pointless, and as deliberate, as it had seemed the first time. I folded the paper carefully, pressing the crease flat with my thumb. Not out of respect, but out of control. If I didn't handle it like this, I might have torn it in half right there. And that would have been too easy. I slipped the folded letter into my jacket pocket and stood there for a moment longer, looking out at the road. At the tracks, at the evidence of my violation. Then, almost without thinking, I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up instantly, bright against the gray morning. Weather app. I tapped it open. The forecast loaded in a second, and there it was. Another storm. Bigger this time, a lot bigger. I stared at the numbers for a few seconds, letting them sink in. Inches stacking on inches. Wind picking up. Temperatures dropping. The kind of storm that didn't just inconvenience people. The kind that shut everything down. Slowly, I lowered the phone. My eyes drifted back to the truck. Then to the road. Then, finally, to the house. The idea didn't arrive all at once. It didn't hit like a sudden burst or a flash of anger. It settled, quiet, steady, unavoidable. If my tracks were such a problem, if clearing the road was such a violation, then maybe it was time to stop violating. I let out a slow breath, feeling something shift inside me, not relief, not quite satisfaction, but something close. Something certain. I gave the truck one last look, then turned and walked back toward the house, boots crunching through the thin layer of fresh snow. Behind me, the road sat exactly as they wanted it. Marked, touched, damaged. For now, but not for long. The snow started just after midnight, soft at first, almost gentle. The kind of snowfall people liked to watch from behind warm windows, thinking it was peaceful, harmless even. But I knew better. I'd seen enough winters here to recognize the difference between a pretty snowfall and a problem. By 1 a.m., it had thickened. By 2, the wind picked up, pushing the snow sideways in long, relentless sheets. By 3, it wasn't falling anymore, it was swallowing. I was awake through all of it. Not pacing, not gearing up, just sitting. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the heater and the occasional rattle of wind against the windows. A mug of coffee rested in my hands, long since gone lukewarm, but I hadn't bothered to refill it. My boots sat by the door. My coat hung right where it always did. And the plow keys were on the table, exactly where I had left them the night before. Untouched. Every instinct I had told me to get up. To move. To do what I'd done every time the sky dumped this much snow on us. I could already picture it. Engine roaring to life, headlights cutting through the storm, the steady rhythm of pushing snow aside before it had the chance to pile too high. It was routine. It was automatic. It was expected. I took a slow breath and leaned back slightly in the chair, staring at the keys instead. Not tonight. Outside, the storm kept building like it had something to prove. By 4 a.m., the windows were half obscured, snow clinging and sliding in uneven streaks. The world beyond them blurred into shifting white and gray, shapes disappearing entirely. I stood once, out of habit more than intention, and walked to the window. The road was already gone. Not covered, gone. There was no clear edge anymore, no line separating asphalt from lawn. Everything had blended into one continuous, rising layer of white. The tracks I'd made earlier were erased completely, buried without a trace. No damage, no violation, just snow. I stayed there for a minute, maybe longer, watching as the wind sculpted small ridges across the surface, building them up, knocking them down, reshaping everything faster than anyone could keep up with. This was the kind of storm that didn't wait for permission, didn't care about rules, didn't recognize approved contractors. I glanced back at the table. The keys hadn't moved, they weren't going to. By sunrise, the storm had slowed, but the damage, or the absence of prevention, was already done. I opened the front door and was immediately met with resistance. Snow had piled up against it, pressing inward like it didn't want to let me out. I pushed harder, forcing it open just enough to squeeze through. The cold hit sharp and immediate, biting into my face and hands. The air felt heavier, thicker, like it had weight now. I stepped out and sank deep. The snow swallowed my boots almost to the top, the ground beneath uneven and hidden. Each step took effort, a slow lift and push that made even crossing my own driveway feel like work. I paused and looked out across the neighborhood. Nothing moved, no engines, no footsteps, no signs of life beyond a few faint lights glowing behind frosted windows. The road, if you could still call it that, was a smooth, unbroken expanse. No tire marks, no plow lines, no indication that it had ever been cleared before. It looked untouched, pure, completely useless. I took another step forward, then stopped near the edge of where my driveway used to meet the street. There was no edge anymore, just more snow. Across the way, a door creaked open. Mrs. Collins. She stood there for a second, bundled in layers, her breath visible in short, quick bursts. She took one cautious step forward, and immediately sank just like I had. She froze, looking down at her legs, then slowly lifted her gaze toward the road. Or where the road should have been. Her expression shifted, confusion giving way to something else. Realization. Her eyes moved again, searching, and eventually landed on me. This time, there was no curtain, no distance, just a long, quiet look. I didn't wave, didn't speak, I just stood there, one hand wrapped around my mug, the other resting at my side. She opened her mouth slightly, like she was about to say something, then stopped. After a moment, she stepped back toward her door, the effort of moving through the snow already enough to discourage her. The door closed behind her with a dull, final sound. Down the street, an engine roared to life. It was loud in the stillness, almost jarring. The sound bounced off the houses, sharp and hopeful. Then came the spinning. Tires whined, high-pitched and desperate, kicking up snow in every direction. I could see the faint shape of a car rocking slightly, trying to gain traction. It didn't move, not forward, not back, just noise and motion going nowhere. The engine revved harder. For a second, it seemed like it might break through, like it might actually push past the resistance. Then it stopped. The sound cut off abruptly, leaving the neighborhood even quieter than before. A few houses down, someone had decided to try a different approach. A man stepped out with a shovel, bundled up, shoulders tense. He started digging right at the edge of his driveway, throwing snow aside in heavy, uneven scoops. At first, he worked quickly, like determination alone might be enough. But the snow was too deep, too heavy. Each shovelful barely made a dent, and what little progress he managed seemed to disappear as the wind shifted loose snow back into place. 10 minutes passed, maybe less. His movements slowed, his posture sagged. Finally, he stopped, leaning on the shovel like it had personally failed him. He looked out at the road, or the absence of it, and just stood there. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still warm. Inside, at least, something was working as it should. Time moved slowly after that, stretching in that strange way it does when nothing is happening and everything is happening at once. More doors opened. More people stepped out. Each reaction was the same. Confusion, effort, defeat. No one got far. They couldn't. The snow wasn't just in the way, it was in charge. By mid-morning, the entrance to the neighborhood finally saw some movement. An SUV approached, its dark shape barely visible against the brightness of the snow. It moved cautiously at first, tires crunching through what little packed surface existed near the main road. Then it stopped, completely. It didn't even try to push forward. Because there was nothing to push into. The entrance had vanished just like everything else, replaced by a dense, uneven wall of snow that rose higher than the vehicle's front bumper. The driver's door opened. The HOA president stepped out. Even from a distance, his posture said everything, rigid, confused, already irritated. He walked a few steps forward, his shoes sinking immediately, and stopped. He just stood there, staring. At the snow. At the space where a clear, drivable road should have been. At the reality of what happens when no one clears anything. His head turned slowly, scanning the neighborhood as if expecting someone else to be out here handling it. There wasn't. Just residents standing in driveways, half-cleared paths, abandoned shovels, and me. He pulled out his phone and made a call. I could see him talking, pacing slightly, his free hand gesturing toward the road like the person on the other end could somehow see the problem. His movements grew sharper, more frustrated. He turned in a slow circle, taking it all in again, as if the second look might somehow change what he was seeing. It didn't. No trucks arrived, no plows, no approved contractors, just silence and snow. I leaned slightly against my porch railing, watching it all unfold. No urgency, no movement toward my truck, no reaching for the keys. Just observation. After a few minutes, he stopped pacing, stopped talking. He lowered the phone and stood there, still and quiet in a way that felt very different from before. Realization had finally caught up. This wasn't going to fix itself. And the person who had been fixing it wasn't. I lifted my mug slightly in his direction. Not high, not exaggerated, just enough to be seen. He didn't wave back, didn't nod, he just looked. And for the first time since that letter showed up on my door, there was no authority in that look. No certainty, just understanding. The road hadn't been damaged. It had been maintained. And now, without that maintenance, it didn't exist at all. I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth settle in. Around us, the neighborhood remained locked in place, buried and quiet. No tracks, no violations, just consequences.